Here's the letter of dismissal from the Prime Minister to Gavin Williamson. It pretty much suggests that the inquiry that was going on into the leak had not been getting his full cooperation. In fact, I think reading between the lines, I think the word slippery comes to mind in terms of how his conduct was seen by Number 10, by the Cabinet Secretary who was leading that. They also say in this letter, Number 10, that they ended up turning up evidence that Gavin Williamson had done the dirty deed itself of leaking information. Gavin Williamson has just this second had a letter put out as well, his reply to the Prime Minister saying, "I strenuously deny that I was in any way involved in the leak." Likewise for his staff, he says. And he suggests a thorough and formal inquiry, unlike the one that's been going on in his eyes, would have vindicated him. I think Gavin Williamson, it has to be said, was fairly unlucky in a sense that this was escalated in the way that it was. You have a very security conscious Prime Minister and a Cabinet Secretary who I think played some of the initial roles in escalating this whole thing, who also happens to be extremely au fait with his security issues and very interested in them, and the National Security Advisor to the government. He couldn't have picked a worse cast if he was going to try and get away with this, which of course he denies ever having done. I think what the Prime Minister will hope has maybe been achieved here is that an awful lot of ministers who are going around freelancing in many ways, quite often doing things that would get you sacked, that this might make them all a bit more manageable, make them think that they are not unsackable. It's far from clear whether it will do that. It is, of course, one of many departures from government that has happened, and they're all happening from a government that is headed by a Prime Minister who everybody knows is not going to be around for that much longer. I'm pretty sure Gavin Williamson, not so many weeks ago, was quite confident his political career would outlive hers.
Where should the finger of blame point in the Huawei leak?
The Defence Secretary ignoring questions yesterday as he left Downing Street. Today he was summoned by the Prime Minister and confronted with evidence that he had leaked the information from the National Security Council. In her letter of dismissal, the Prime Minister wrote that all those attending the relevant National Security Council meeting have answered leak inquiry questions, engaged properly, provided as much information as possible to assist with the investigation, and encouraged their staff to do the same. Your conduct has not been of the same standard. Now, the Prime Minister wrote, there was compelling evidence suggesting your responsibility for the unauthorised disclosure. 18 months ago, when Gavin Williamson got the job, he was said as Chief Whip to have recommended himself to Theresa May for promotion. Was it hard recommending yourself for the job? The military found him bumptious, too keen to make sweeping remarks. Admirers had once talked about him as a leadership contender. His reputation made as David Cameron's eyes and ears in the Commons, and then Theresa May's Chief Whip, rejoicing in his Machiavellian role, starting a speech to conference with these prophetic words.
For peddling of secrets, dark arts, the odd inducement, or even threat. But conference, please rest assured, some of this is fiction.
Gavin Williamson played a central role in hooking the DUP into supporting Theresa May's government after the snap election in 2017. The then Cabinet Secretary very much backed that mission. His successor, Sir Mark Sidwell, played a central role in escalating the leak inquiry to a sacking offence. The International Development Secretary, Penny Mordaunt, becomes the first woman Defence Secretary, a lift to her leadership ambitions. Another with leadership ambitions, Prisons Minister Rory Stewart, joins the Cabinet in her old job at International Development.
Should there now be a police investigation into Gavin Williamson?
These are matters for National Security Advisor and the Prime Minister. Thank you.
Number 10 will hope Gavin Williamson's sacking shows the Prime Minister does still have authority she can wield over freelancing ministers. But the record-breaking rate of ministerial departures, and the fact the leak happened at all, rather undermines that.
Gary Gibbon, our political editor. Well, Tom Watson, Labour's deputy leader and a former defence minister, joins us now from the House of Commons. Tom Watson, I mean, Gavin Williamson has written a letter saying that actually it wasn't him. The Prime Minister's letter is utterly damning. Is it churlish to ask who you believe?
No, actually I think he deserves to clear his name if he can, but clearly the Prime Minister thinks that he's breached the Official Secrets Act. If a civil servant had done that, they would be prosecuted. And so I think there should be a criminal investigation into this, and the law will establish whether Gavin Williamson is telling the truth or not.
So you're saying that he should actually possibly eventually clear his name in court?
What the Prime Minister is effectively saying is, as Secretary of State for Defence, he's breached the Official Secrets Act. I remember the briefing myself. When you're a minister, you are deemed to be to have signed the Official Secrets Act, whether you do or don't, whether you actually sign the piece of paper or not. And she is basically alleging that he's broken the law, and in those cases, the law must apply to everyone, no matter what their status.
And to leak such sensitive information, pertaining to the defence, to the safety of the realm, as Defence Secretary, that in itself is perhaps the most shocking about this, isn't it?
I can't think of a similar episode in my political life, and that's why the letter of dismissal was the most brutal sacking letter I've ever seen in my time in Parliament. And rightly so if he did this. It's a very serious allegation. He would know that leaking information from that particular committee is just not done, and I can understand why the Prime Minister and the Cabinet Secretary were so concerned about it.
Should the Prime Minister's evidence be tested in a court of law, and should he be found guilty? Should he go to jail?
Well, there are two levels here. I mean, obviously you serve at the discretion of the Prime Minister, and she's clearly decided that at least one bar has been passed, that he's not been cooperating with the inquiry. But the central allegation of her letter is the evidence suggests that he has breached the Official Secrets Act. And, civil servants, very high-profile civil servants, have gone to jail in the past for leaking information. If he has done that, and he deserves to be able to clear his name, but if he has done it, he should be dealt with it by the courts. And the obvious way to deal with this is to launch a criminal inquiry.
So jail is on the cards?
Well, he deserves justice, but justice has to be applied equally. And the Prime Minister can't just accuse him of law breaking and leaking secrets without the obvious next step, which is a criminal inquiry.
As Gary Gibbon suggested in his piece, this also gives the Prime Minister, a rather, timely ability to crap the whip and create a little bit of discipline in her cabinet, discipline which has been woefully absent in the past. So in that sense, she could turn this, despite the embarrassment of it all, to her political advantage, couldn't she?
She might do, but I honestly don't think, and she will have done this on advice, and she would have been given the response to the leak inquiry. No Prime Minister would have a choice in this. If the inquiry showed that the overwhelming evidence suggested that he was the leaker, she's got no choice but to sack him.
OK, Tom Watson, thank you very much indeed. Mr Williamson denies being the source of the leaks. Well, the chairman of the Defence Select Committee, the Conservative MP, Julian Lewis, is in Westminster for us now. Julian Lewis, who do you believe, the Prime Minister or Gavin Williamson?
I'm not in a position to make a judgment on that. All I can do is talk about the defence and security issues involved in the leak, and perhaps make some comments that might interest you about Gavin's tenure as Defence Secretary and Penny Mordaunt's prospects as the future Defence Secretary.
OK, we'll talk about those in a minute, but how serious is it? And the Prime Minister's letter, which I'm sure you've seen, is pretty damning. How serious is it for the Defence Secretary, the man charged with defending our nation, to be charged like this?
Well, it's a matter for extreme censure for any cabinet minister to leak from any cabinet committee. I know that there's a lot of hype about the fact that this was to do with a highly sensitive issue involving a Chinese telecommunications firm and the future security of the country. But as far as I can see, nothing was leaked of that nature. What appears to have been leaked is the issue about which ministers supported allowing this company to penetrate our critical national infrastructure further, and which ministers didn't. That is a political leak, if you like, rather than a security leak. But having said that, it is obviously a sackable offence for any cabinet minister or anyone else to leak the contents of a cabinet committee meeting.
Well, you call it hype, but there were any number of spy chiefs and military chiefs who were appalled by the fact that this information was leaked, and who will be appalled by the fact that it was Defence Minister, their former boss, who did it.
I can only repeat what I've just said. There is a difference between leaking issues about the support for a policy or the opposition to a policy and leaking top secret information. Having said that, it was still a sackable offence, and if Gavin Williamson did it, then he deserved to be sacked.
There are some military chiefs and spy chiefs who said, we should go after this leak, we should have a criminal investigation. So should the evidence that the Prime Minister was talking about in her letter now be tested in a court of law?
That's a matter for the lawyers, not for me. I'm here to talk about the defence aspects of this.
Okay, and what can we expect from Penny Mordaunt, the first female Secretary of State for Defence, to take this job?
Well, I'd like to say, first of all, that I think Gavin Williamson did a good job as Secretary of State for Defence. He successfully resisted mad ideas like destroying our amphibious capability, and he successfully fought off attempts to make further drastic cuts in our conventional armed forces. Okay. Penny, I think, has a splendid background. She is a highly committed naval reservist. She is somebody who represents one of our main naval port towns, and she is somebody who brings the maximum amount of prior knowledge and good judgment to the post, and I very much look forward to working with her.
All right.